we're continuing to talk about the book of Revelation. And interesting thing about this title, it's the book of Revelation, singular, not the book of Revelations. A lot of people just say book of Revelations. It's actually the book of Revelation, which is kind of interesting little tidbit here. So we're talking about the wonder in heaven. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, pain to be delivered. So it introduces the female concept in the creation here. And as you know, we're talking, the book covers the path of the disciple from the time he begins to aspire to go higher to becoming like Christ. And as he goes through this process, he embraces a number of works and words that he receives a mission in life, so to speak. He understands his mission, and he has to transmute that mission into words and works that can be presented to the masses, to people that are searching, to just depends on the situation. So the disciple puts together the ideas that he receives by revelation, and he balances off the male and female together, and this produces a creation. And we left off with this verse here, verse 2. We covered verse 1. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. So the male and female energies that are accumulated by the disciple as he goes along produces ideas within in him that need to be presented. And it's like to give birth to those ideas is like giving birth to a child. It's not just an easy thing to develop an idea and then just say, this is it, let's do it. For instance, Elon Musk, he decides he wants to go to Mars. Okay, well, you can just say that, well, this is the idea, put this together. Okay, well, that not quite that easy to develop spaceships so that you can go to Mars. That's a heck of an idea, but it's something that requires the putting together of the male, female energies, developing the idea, put together the words and the works in such a way, and then when you get the concept in your mind, then it's a struggle to make that concept actually materialize, no matter what it is. Same thing with Jesus. When Jesus presented his teachings, it was quite a struggle for those teachings to surface even after he was gone. The female energy which gives birth to that struggled, travailing in birth, pain to be delivered, and the disciples were persecuted, attacked, killed. It was very difficult to incorporate the teachings of Christ. Now, this pertains to any work to a degree that moves humanity forward. Any work that moves humanity forward is going to be a struggle to manifest.
I was watching a movie last night about the B-52, the creation of it in 1956.
Yeah.
Also called the Stratofortress because it traveled 8 miles high, could go 600 miles an hour, and could travel like 6,000 miles without refueling. And the designers, the engineers, all stood on the shoulders of giants. They took knowledge from the B-47 and the B-29, the B-17, the evolution of and the science of flight into this most accomplished development. As far as flight, it was the most sophisticated jet at the time. And our goal was to create an army or a legion of stratofortresses to protect the country and the world. But in so doing, it showed all the conflict that raged between people with ideas, the engineers, and then when they flew the first one, it had all kinds of problems. People had to bail out, and they barely escaped with their lives. But they finally gave birth to it. But it was a very, very difficult birthing, just in that movie.
Yeah, and that principle kind of applies with any significant work where you move beyond uh, what's commonplace today, uh, especially any work that threatens the powers that be. But even now, that didn't really threaten the powers that be, but it was a move forward. But any move forward, you have these principles apply that the it's like it's travailing in birth, pain to be delivered, and that even applied to something like the B-52.
Well, it
So
threatened Russia and or China. It threatened the powers that were, and you know that we were in the Korean conflict and then the Cold War.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
There were a lot of opposition. Oh man, that started the space wars. Who's gonna create the most? It ended up being most atomic weapons. So yeah, we disturbed a lot of planetary forces when we created that B-52.
yeah. This generation probably doesn't appreciate that.
Had 8 jet engines, by the way, is pretty phenomenal work of art.
Yeah. And then the next verse says, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads." So, what's this great red dragon doing in heaven? I mean, how can it be heaven with a red dragon up there with all these heads and everything, interfering with everything? Now, red here comes from the Greek word "pyrios," which means the color of fire. The red indicates the lower passions. So when the disciple goes forward, and this all happens in heaven, and heaven represents revelation. So the disciple gets an idea or revelation or just a really good idea and something to move progress forward. And uh, after he gets this going, and it looks like he's going to be able to deliver it, it's going to be a struggle. But then there appears another wonder in heaven, the red dragon, and uh, it's having 7 heads, which means this red dragon affects all the sinners uh, to some degree. The red color represents the passion of the lower nature, and the material side is still there, and it affects the work of the disciple in a number of ways. Uh, the people he's working with are still, many of them are still controlled by the lower nature, and they will attack the work in a number of different ways. Even the people on the inside. Say if whether you're Elon Musk wanting to go to Mars or it's Steve Jobs developing the the iPhone or whatever. Let's take Steve Jobs, for instance. You think Steve Jobs just says, well, this is the way it is and we're going to do it? There was probably a lot of conflict there, saying there was probably people there saying, I don't think this iPhone is a good idea. You know, people aren't going to use it. People want to just stick with a BlackBerry or something like that. And we're just spinning our wheels. So you had that conflict going on, the red dragon, so to speak. So Steve Jobs gets this idea for the iPhone, great idea, and it's pain to be delivered, and then the red dragon comes and tells everybody why it won't work, why it's a bad idea, and why we shouldn't go along with it. And so this plays out. The red dragon affects all of the centers, and the 10 horns represents the different philosophies and religions of the planet itself, and they all come forward to keep the establishment the way that it is. In any religion, if a religion is affected, they will say, no, you can't go against the principles of the religion or we're going to throw you out. So this red dragon appears in a number of different ways. So the red dragon is really a symbol of the ego. The ego wants to dominate and keep us in the lower nature. But when the disciple comes up with a work composed of words and works that will take people higher, then you have this tremendous pull that takes us backward. So the disciple is still affected by the solar plexus, and that's where the word number 10 also comes in. The solar, it has 10 horns, and the 10 horns are really one of the symbols, and each thing has a number of different symbols, but the solar plexus itself has 10 petals. And so these 10 petals from the solar plexus keeps pulling us away from the work, so that the man-child that is, or the creation that is talking about, will not be delivered. This is the work of the red dragon, to prevent the delivery of the child. And with his tail, he drew a third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So the stars of heaven represent true revelations that the disciple gets. And stars are permanent truths that are revealed to him. But the lower part of his nature sees these truths. And this is exemplified not only in the lower part of the nature of the disciple, but the lower nature of people at surface that interfere with the work. And so when the disciple presents a divine idea, the lower nature kind of sweeps with its tail and diminishes the purity of it. So when it's finally presented, it's not presented in its purity, but it's lost approximately a third of it. So you could take the teachings of Jesus, for instance. He presented he originally presented his teachings with great purity, but as soon as he was out of the way, a third of his message was diluted. So he only had like maybe 2/3 of it left, and that third was the ideas of the lower nature interjected with the pure teachings of Christ. And this happens with every great work. It never quite materializes in purity the way the initiate planned. And well, take the foundation of our country. Uh, there was tremendous friction in creating the Constitution. There were people that wanted more central control, and other people wanted more democracy, and they argued like crazy. They almost got into fistfights, and so it was lucky that we got a document as good as it was, but it's still not perfect. Uh, the ones that saw the total vision um, didn't get all their ideas incorporated in it. There's still it's still not a perfect document, but it's a lot better than we had before. And so it's what we had to work with. And this is the way it is with just about you take any uh, great teacher or movement, and you find the dilution begin to happen right away.
Can you think of an idea or a concept that could have been or should have been incorporated that was deleted or corrupted?
As far as the Christian church goes, you mean, or what?
The Constitution.
Um, well, a number of things. Like it was obscure on the Second Amendment is kind of obscure. It says to establish how's that worded? Uh, a militia. It sounds like you need almost a militia. It says it's uh, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, but then it adds in it sounds almost makes it sound like the right to bear arms is related to being in a militia, and that obscures everything. And that needed to be written a lot more clear to is just one thing. And then the establishment of money, it says gold and silver is supposed to be our medium of exchange, which that's been thrown out the window.
Only so much gold and silver out there.
Yeah. So it's head and shoulders above what they had before, but it's still not perfect. Yet you have the constitutionalists that are really black and white that act like it is a perfect document, but it's a really great document, but it's still not perfect. It could have been written with a lot more clarity. If on the hindsight that we have now, we could probably write it where it's a lot better than it is now for if it was written by inspired people. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of people who want to pretty much throw out a lot of things, like even the First Amendment of free speech. A lot of people want to throw that out the window and say, well, hate speech shouldn't be in there. And well, what's hate speech? It's speech that somebody hates. But that's what the First Amendment is there to protect, so that if somebody's saying something you hate to hear, well, they still have the right to say it. But
Well, the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, and they're the rights of the individual to bear arms, to express himself, to gather, to criticize, to do whatever. That's the right of the individual, and that's the Bill of Rights.
yeah,
So,
yeah, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights together, that's very good. Perhaps the Bill of Rights itself is it's we're really lucky it even came into being.
that's for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of people bear arms, though. They carry arms. They, they arm themselves, carry pistols, and nobody says or does anything. They just kind of look at them funny.
Yeah, maybe in Idaho, but in California, you couldn't get away with that.
Or New York City.
Um,
You
okay,
can't.
and she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So eventually, if the disciple perseveres, there is given birth to a man child and caught up to God and to his throne. So the disciple struggles with the birth of the work, but eventually he realizes that it needs to be lifted up above the lower nature, above the solar plexus, to God and his throne. So if the work is to survive, it needs to be lifted up so that the people with higher vision can see the truth of it. So this is the idea of being lifted up to God and to his throne. It means to be lifted up above the emotional lower nature. And the woman fled into the wilderness, for she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So what happens is when the work is created, like we go back to the great example of Christ creating his work, church was created among it, and the true teachings is on the higher level where the consciousness has to be lifted up to the higher centers to be able to comprehend the birth. Okay, and those that are not capable of lifting their consciousness up will see the work developing on a lower level. And so the church developed an authoritarian system with a pope and all kinds of teachings that were not related to the beginning. And those that saw the truth were those that were able to lift their consciousness up to heaven, so to speak. And they could see the truth, but the average person couldn't. And so the truth fled into the wilderness for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. In other words, we go back to the 3.5 cycles. So for 3.5 cycles, after the work is presented, it the core truths are only seen by those that have the higher consciousness. Everybody else, it's like the truth is in the wilderness. It's in the wilderness where it's hid. The average people that was in the churches for the past 2,000 years, in the Christian churches, they did not see the true woman. They did not see the true creation because it was in the wilderness. But then the time comes, it comes out of the wilderness. The truth is not never destroyed. Sooner or later, after a period of 3.5 cycles, the truth starts to come back. Okay, any comment on that?
Yeah, isn't there the three cycles of accepting a true idea? First people fight against it and reject it, and then the second step is they begin to see the value of it, like alternating current and electricity. They fought against it, then they accepted it. And then the third is, hey, well, that was our idea all along.
Yeah, yeah.
Got the three stages of accepting an idea.
Yeah, and many of the people that actually persecuted the early Christians are reincarnated as Christians today, supporting the teachings of Christ, so to speak, in their own way. So it's interesting how things transpire. And after 3.5 cycles, we're now in an age where a lot of the purity of the teachings of Christ are surfacing in by various teachers, revelations, um, uh, the works of the Tibetan, for instance, Course in Miracles, are bringing back a lot of the essence that was in the wilderness. They weren't not completely gone. And these essential teachings have always been grasped by the enlightened, by those who have ascended to the throne of God in heaven in their minds. They have always been able to access the truth. But the rank and file, for the rank and file, the truth has been, the pure truth has been in the wilderness. And now we're living in an age where a lot of the truth is coming back and will be manifest again.
Like karma, a lot of Christians have a hard time with the concept of karma, that you have to you're responsible for your own actions. A lot of churches teach Jesus, you do whatever you want. Jesus paid the price for your sins, so don't sweat it. So that's coming back.
Yeah. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. And he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So let's look at the first part here. And there was war in heaven. And Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Okay, how could there be war in heaven? Would it be heaven if there was a war going on? How could this happen? Now, heaven represents higher consciousness, which unfolds with the activation of the seven centers, especially when the top two, the Ajna center here in the forehead, and then the crown center, when they begin to be fully activated, then there's then that's the consciousness of heaven begins to materialize. So the revelation of higher consciousness reveals the duality of the fiery dragon and the angel Michael. Michael comes from the Hebrew Michael, and that standard definition is one who is like God, but more literally it reads one who is God. But the word God comes from the last two letters, El, which can be translated as either God or mighty and strong. So it's not always translated as God, but it's often refers to God in the scriptures because God is mighty and strong. And so technically it's saying that this is the strength of God is represented by Michael going against the dragon, and the dragon represents the ego or the lower nature. So you have this war going on. Not only the disciple has to go through it, but the people involved in the work has to go through this, where you have the consciousness of God being presented in a great work, and it's fought against by the lower nature. The egos get involved, and they say, "Well, you know, yeah, Jesus taught love and all this. This is good, but he also chased the money changers out of the temple. So we need to get in there and rough things up a little bit sometimes." So the ego steps in, and it uses its own logic to diminish the purity of the teachings, for instance, in this case, love. So they will focus on Jesus being angry and clearing the temple rather than the the more common teachings about love and its purity, and that will be diminished. And so you have this war in heaven, and the war in heaven happens within the minds of the disciple initiating the work and those participating in the work and those against the work. You have the battle between the ego and the higher self, and this war in heaven continues to this day. We see this war against higher consciousness and higher innovations playing out anywhere. I mean, just let anyone disturb the powers that be that are controlling the world, and you will see the dragon of the ego coming out of nowhere and attacking and trying to destroy the person that is trying to make positive change in the world. Okay, any comment on that? And it says, oh yeah.
Yeah. I try to talk with my family about the Gospel of Thomas, and they have always been Christians, you know, and it's so difficult to get through. I mean, it's just a wall to penetrate through, and they don't want to listen or hear anything that is contrary to the Bible, that they think is contrary to the Bible and their beliefs. And yeah, I just have to let it go, because it creates such an atmosphere that it is unbelievable, even within your own family.
Yeah, so the war in heaven is basically Maria is focusing on the higher thought, and they want to stay with the lower nature. What's comfortable for the lower nature? It's comfortable just going with what the priests are telling us to think, and so that's the dragon keeping us from ascending to heaven. And then the next verse, and the dragon prevailed not, and neither was their place found any more in heaven. So the disciples overcame the once powerful ego, but even that ego seemed to aspire to be like the Most High. The ego wanted the powers, the divine powers, without making any of the changes. It just wants the power to control and tell what to do. So the true disciples, they reject these outward authorities, these angels that followed the dragon, and these are outer authorities that are trying to tell us what to do to stay in line with the powers that be. And so we have this war going on, and to win the war, we need to ascend our thoughts to heaven, which is the higher nature, the higher part of ourselves, to have soul contact, to contact our higher self, to bring down inspiration, and this will defeat the dragon. And that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So the lower self then is no longer part of the decision-making process, but is relegated to earthly matters. So the people that are in the lower self, they're like the bureaucrats and the people that are controlling the masses, so that they do not ascend to the higher nature, so that the higher stuff doesn't interfere with the lower. They stay there and they're cast down to the earth, whereas the disciple and those that ascend to heaven in their thoughts proceed with the work of change that will eventually prevail. But like it said at the beginning, it's like a woman giving birth in pain, travailing to be delivered. And this eventually will happen, but it just doesn't happen by snapping your fingers or wishing it. It's a struggle between the lower and the higher nature to make the change eventually prevail. And say one great change that's really obvious would be the elimination of slavery. For thousands of years, it was just accepted as the norm, and the disciples of the world slowly made inroads into the fact that now the idea of slavery is relegated to the earth, so to speak, to the lowest type of thinking, and it was painful to deliver humanity from the idea of slavery, but they were eventually delivered. But it wasn't without a lot of struggle. It took a lot of struggle to make it happen, and that's just one thing. There's all kinds of innovations that's going on right now. There's a struggle for light and truth to prevail, but eventually it does. And that's what we call the dominating good. Good does dominate over evil, but it doesn't always appear that way because we go two steps forward and one step back, so to speak. But good always does, in the end, go forward more than de-evolution or evil. Okay, any comments before we move on here?
Well, we see that with nuclear energy. First, we discovered nuclear energy, then we used it for destructive purposes, but it can be used, to power. You could use a nuclear power cell that big to power your car forever. So the door will be opening for the right use of nuclear energy, I think.
Yeah, well, there's
So
a
that's good.
lot of truth in that. Okay, my friends, let's